Awesome. Let's go for it.
810, Craig, you're on the air.
Delight to hear from you, sir.
How
you be?
I don't know what the question was, so you might have to ask me.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
She said it was about honoring your parents.
Honoring father and mother. Okay. Well, yeah, that was a question that you guys had communicated with me a few weeks ago, and so maybe we'll finally get around to talking about that from the Aramaic perspective. Is that still a question for you?
It's a struggle for me.
Okay, perfect. Well, we've got an answer for your struggle. We can support you getting through that one and being done with that one in your world. Here's how it's done. You'll notice that in the scriptures, they ask Yeshua, what's most important in the law? And the word law is totally misinterpreted in the Western world. It does not mean the rule of a superior and you're in trouble if you don't obey. There's no obedience involved in the law or in relationship to the Creator. Obedience is not a thing at all in Aramaic. That's a whole Greek thing. The kings wanted to control people, so you better be obedient or the king's going to come and get you. So they made God in their image and likeness, and that's how we came up with this punishing monstrosity. It's going to get you if you don't obey. But the word law in Aramaic is simply the way things work. So if you know how things work, like for instance, if you know how gravity works, you stand on the edge of a cliff and you look over the ocean, you go, wow, that's really beautiful, and you look down at that rocky thing, and understanding the law, you know that gravity works, and you don't step off the cliff. Not because some God's going to come punish you, it's just the way things work. If you step off the cliff, gravity says bones break at the bottom. So they're saying to Yeshua, in essence, in that particular question, if you're a human being, how do things, what's the core? What's first? What's most important? And he doesn't say love God, love neighbor as yourself. In Aramaic, what he says is, have Rakhma for the Creator, for neighbor, and by so doing, you'll maintain self. Now, there's no such concept in the English language. It's going to take a whole paragraph to describe what Rakhma is. There's no such concept and no such word in the Latin language or the Greek language. So we've had no access to this idea of Rakhma whatsoever. You know, neuroscientists are starting to discover that certain parts of the brain have to do with love being active in the mind. Well, that's what Yeshua was talking about 2,000 years ago. He said, anybody that you think about, if you want to be human, if you want to function out of your human beingness, out of your human life, rather than out of some form of hostility, fear, rage, guilt, grief, trauma, pain, blame, resentment toward another for what they've done, then you have Rakhma, which is a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain that, when active, is, number one, a gateway through which your created essence, love, enters into and inhabits your body-mind unit. So you are functioning out of what was called in the Aramaic the mind of Christ. Christ wasn't the name of a man. It's an office in Aramaic, and so that mind is available to all of us. We're all designed to live out of a mind connected to love. It's literally the Creator's mind, and it's our birthright to have that. So when he says you must have Rakhma, what he's saying is have this filter active and this gateway open, and your human created essence, which is love. If you've ever held a newborn and tapped into the essence of the newborn, you know what love is, and it's not really describable. You can't put it into words, but it's pretty powerful. We just got to spend a whole week with our new grandson who's just been circling the earth for the last 7 weeks, and so we had a week of much time holding this newborn essence. Pretty sweet. But he said if you're going to have that human essence, your human life, love, active in you, then Rakhma is the requirement. So, and then there are two basic objects of attention that a human can have. One is neighbor, and in Aramaic, neighbor is a mental word. It's not a physical word. It hasn't got to do with, honoring the guy down the block or having love for the guy down the block, your physical neighbor. But in Aramaic, anybody that you thought about was your neighbor. So in essence, he's saying, you want to maintain your human life, you want to live as love, then you got to keep this gateway open. whoever you think about. And the most hostile, rageful, insane neighbor that's done everything they could to destroy you is the most important one to have Rakhma for, because they're the one who can resonate in you, your unresolved pain, and you lose your human life to that pain when it's active. And it's that pain that needs to be forgiven. So neighbor, and then the other object of attention, of course, is the creator. So many people have so much rage for the creator. Oh, the creator, so often the religions aren't having a clue that the person who stepped off the cliff had their bones broken, not because God punished them or did something to them, but because they violated the law of gravity or any other thing in the universe and the way it works. So many have much resentment toward the creator. And so he's saying, when you think of the creator, keep this condition active in you, and you will maintain your human life. You will be the presence of love. And as you function out of the presence of love, because Rakhma is active, your mind will track with love, and the perceptions, the fruit of your mind, your perceptions, will support you living as love, because they'll all be keyed to love. So that's his first statement there. And that applies, if you look at that, that applies to anybody in the world. But there's one group of people that there is a higher requirement for. And the group of people that there's a higher requirement for are the group of people who are likely to be your power persons. A power person is someone, it's usually a situation between a parent and a child. Not always. It can happen in many arenas, but this comes out of our codependence to interdependence work. A power person is a person who, number one, had more power over your life at some point than you did. Again, it's usually a parent and a child. Number two, was not functioning as a human being, was not functioning out of love. And number three, the child in that circumstance where the parent's got the power and isn't functioning out of love perceives the circumstance as survival. When that happens, the child's energy field, if you imagine the energy field energetically being like a sponge, the child's energy field opens and they become a sponge, and every energy moving in the environment is absorbed by the child into their physiology. And we're talking energy, not just words. If a power person delivered a negative message, that's absorbed by the child. But if there was, let's say, rage behind the message, then the child would also absorb that rage. Once that power person dynamic is installed in a child's mind, for the rest of that child's life, until that power person dynamic is resolved, until it's forgiven, their lives will be run by that dynamic in them. In other words, it will destroy their human lives. The ability to keep love present will not be possible for someone in that situation. So, and once one has that power person dynamic instilled in them, there are only three behaviors possible for them throughout their lives. And the behaviors they will do will relate to the level of stress that they're under. When there's little or no stress, that person will do whatever they did to get along with their power person. So, what they might have did was, as a kid, they learned to be funny and cute, and the way they handled the attack of their power person was to be funny and cute, and, it became a normal mode of behavior when there was little or no stress. So how did they get along with their power person? That's the basic personality of most every person. So when there's little or no stress, virtually everybody will live out of that, whatever they did to get along with their power person. When stress starts to build, and this is oftentimes reflected in relationships, when stress starts to build, people will shift out of doing what they did to get along with their power person into doing what they did to resist and survive with their power person. So let's say, the kid became Mr. Funny, Mr. or Ms. Nice Guy, And you meet that person and you go, wow, you're Mr. and Ms. Nice Guy. You're really cool. I like you. Let's create a relationship. Oh, I love you. Let's have fun. Let's get married. Let's have a great time together because this is so wonderful. And time goes by, and when stress starts to build, this person who from day one that you met them was Mr. and Ms. Nice Guy, all of a sudden is Mr. and Ms. Snarky, because now they've shifted into this is part of the psychological dynamic and teaching of Yeshua. What has happened is, at that new level of stress, what's called the automatic decision system kicks in, and now they do what they did to resist and survive with their power person. So now, all of a sudden, this person you've been hanging out with for 5 years, and they've been Mr. and Ms. Nice Guy, it's been wonderful. All of a sudden, the way they handled that, when they were in resistance and survival with their power person was to be Mr. and Ms. Snarky. And you look at this person after 5 years, it's like, what's wrong with you? This isn't who I married. You were Ms. or Mr. Nice Guy. What's wrong with you? Why are you Mr. Snarky? Why are you Ms. Snarky now? And then the third level of behavior. So there's little or no stress. One does what they did to get along with their power person. Stress starts to build. They do what they did to resist and survive with their power person. And then level 3 stress, when they're ultra stressed, what people do is whatever their power person did to them that they hated the most. Now that runs virtually every life on the planet. That runs the planet. That runs every business, every church, every government. That's why there's so much craziness in the world. And as far as I know, until this dynamic is resolved, that's going to run every mind. And as far as I know, this dynamic has never been explained and never been available other than through the understanding of the teachings of Yeshua and brought forward in this work. So what happens if I'm with my power person and I'm ultra stressed and my power person is mom or dad? I'm in, let's say what dad did was beat the hell out of me. I'm ready to raise my fists and fight and beat on somebody. What happened to my human life? I lost it. I surrendered the presence of love to this power person dynamic that came from the negative interaction with my parent, who was my power person. So how do you resolve that? Somebody says to Yeshua. He says, here's how you do it. Here's what the law says. Here's the way that works. If you want to be love, if you want to be a human being all the time, then when you interact with your parents, whether they're alive or dead, whether you do it physically or mentally, he didn't say have Rakhma for them. There's a whole new standard. He says you got to honor them. And the traumatic the experience was with them, the more important it is to obey this law if you want to maintain your human life. Now, if it's fine with you to keep going to doing what your power person did to you that you hated the most, or being inclined to that, maybe being able to control yourself, but having that moving in you, what does honor mean? What's different between Rakhma and honoring? Well, honoring your parent includes Rakhma. You have this condition set in your mind so that your mind is on track with love, and you bring your human life, the active presence of love, into behavior toward that parent, who as your power person was maybe terribly abusive. And what happens when you bring active present love through your physiology toward them? You get to heal. It's not about them. You're not doing this thing of honoring your father and your mother for them. You're doing it because if they were your power person, you bring active present love through your physiology where your trauma is stored, and you are freed of your trauma. Your trauma will be forgiven in the presence of that love, will be removed. That's why law was put in place. You want to keep living a human life? Then the person who can most powerfully resonate your pain and your trauma is the most important person for you to stand in your human life, firmly fixed there, and bring your being, your presence of love into activity toward them. And if locked into your physiology is all kinds of trauma, if you spent, years and years and years with your fists and your jaw clenched, then it's going to take some physiological work. It's going to take some deep psychological work. It's going to take some deep forgiveness to be freed of that dynamic. so that you can function, so that your physiology is an open space where love, your human created essence, is welcome, incarnates in the world, and then flows out into the world. And incidentally, incarnating, living as the presence of love, and extending and having that love flow out to you into the world, even to the abusive. Remember, he said, the Creator lets the rain fall on the just and the unjust. This isn't about whether somebody's just or unjust, or you got a judgment or, some sort of a complaint against them. It's about you maintaining your human life. And when you do, you get the benefit. And the more painful the interaction was as a child with a power person, the more important it is to do that. I remember we did a workshop in Fort Lauderdale, Florida back. We were invited by a fellow who had been an AA member for 30-some years, and he had a large online support community in the AA groups, and had a large as a sponsor. And he invited us. He heard about our work, and he invited us to come and speak, and I did. And afterward, when I explained this power person dynamic in our codependence workshop, afterward he's like, well, Michael, I was hoping this was going to be something really useful, but that's just not. I know from experience that what you just said isn't true. Because when I was a kid, my father beat me mercilessly every day. And he said, I had a son, and I never touched my son. I never hit him. And he was kind of like in this hard-ass kind of place, yeah, see, you're wrong here. I said, okay, I got it. I hear you, and I acknowledge you for having the ability to control your fists and never hitting your son. But how much time do you still spend having to control your fists? And I could have pushed him over with a feather. He broke down because that was his challenge. He'd spent his whole life, 30 years sober, controlling his fists so he didn't hit, so he didn't play out his power person dynamic. If he knew how to honor his father, who was his abuser, then love flowing through his stored abuse in his carbon-based memory system, in his physiology, would have been removed, and he'd been freed of that dynamic and that trauma with his father by following the first law, or the law in regard to parents. Does that make sense? Are you breathing?
Not really.
So I'll breathe with you. Let's just take a minute and just take a couple of breaths. Because it's a big piece of information, especially if you've had a traumatic upbringing with a power person.
Wasn't good.
Yeah, I hear you. I understand. I'm with you. In fact, my power person was my challenge, and I actually shared on the show about, I don't know, it's maybe 6 or 8 months ago, that I finally finished my work around my relationship with my power person, my father, about 6 months ago. I had come to many layers in the earliest days of developing this work. When I first started doing it, one of the memories that I got in touch with was, I had asthma from birth. And without getting into that whole story, the day I touched into my father belittling me and pushing me into a corner in tears was the day that my asthma was resolved. My lungs weren't fully healed, but my asthma was resolved. And a lot of allergies, I couldn't go near people cutting grass. And that weekend, that's such a powerful memory, getting in touch with that situation with my dad. I went back. I was in the restaurant business at that point, and I had a 5-acre, beautifully landscaped, manicured property, but I always had to have somebody else cut the grass. The next day I got on the tractor and I cut the 5 acres myself without the slightest reaction to the grass. That was the starting point, and that was about 50 years ago, a little better than 50 years ago. I've gone through several layers. One of the memories that came up probably, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago was a kid, and I had, we lived on a dead-end street, and my dad worked shifts, and he was on 4 to 12 shift. And I I don't know, I was maybe 5, 6, maybe 7, I don't know. And I had a friend up the street, and his dad had just poured a new concrete sidewalk in front of his house. And somehow or other, I just thought it was a great idea to take this Indian rubber ball that I had in my hand and bounce it in his newly formed concrete sidewalk. And he was looking through the window, watching me do it. He waited up till my dad got back from night shift, 4 to 11. I can remember that statement from him being a kid. Dad's on 4 to 11. And he stopped him and told him. And my dad tore me out of bed. And the memory that I have is screaming at him, if you keep hitting me, you're going to kill me. That was a piece of work I did about 15 years ago. And you've heard me speak about how precious my granddaughter is to me.
Yeah.
And that we've been raising her for about 6 years. And about 6 months ago, I was doing a still point session, doing some of the quantum still point work. And for the first time, I mean, I'd resolved with my dad, and it was like, if he's, of course, long past, but if I'd met him on the street, I could easily have said, hey, Dad, how you doing? And shook his hand and smiled and been in delight with him. But I never could have done what happened 6 months ago in that still point session. And in that session, my dad came to me, and in the same energy that I would embrace my precious granddaughter, I was able to embrace him the first time with that same energy of present love and cherishing that I couldn't do before then. It took me a long time. But that piece of work finished for me about 6. That's the point at which I feel and consider that I've completed my work around my dad. And perhaps the work of fathers and sons in my generations. Because about 2 years ago, I had another still point session I was in, and I was shown a field of darkness that was beyond what I could possibly fathom or imagine, a visual field of darkness. And in that visual field of darkness, there were an uncountable number of lights. I'm breathing away and I'm being shown this, and it's like, what is this? What are you showing me? And what I was told was these were my ancestors and the darkness that they were living in. And the spots of light were the beings that were trapped in this darkness, and they were asking me in that still point session if I would help to process the darkness that they were trapped in. At which point I verbally out loud said, yes, I would gladly do that. And it feels to me like with this piece of work that I just did with my dad that I've accomplished that one with my generational patterns of fathers and sons. And until enough of us do that, Yeshua says a little leavening leavens a whole loaf. He's not talking about bread. He's talking about us as human beings. Until enough of us can show up in our physiology, passing through Rakhma, through that filter, and showing up as the created essence of love that we are, incarnated in our physiology, and then being able to extend that love out to the world. That's the critical mass he's talking about. Enough people, small number who will do that, and the whole world will be transformed by it. To me, that's the ultimate value in us doing our work. And I don't know anybody that had the understanding that he had, and here's how you do it. And that's what I've spent the last 50-plus years doing, is bringing that down to, rather than somebody having to spend 50 years and go figure it out for themselves, bringing it down to, okay, here's the tool. Here's how you do it. And each tool is a refinement and brought into, my original work was in the field of electronics. And in that field, it didn't matter what your philosophy was. If you were building a piece of electronic equipment, designing a piece of equipment, or repairing a piece of equipment, it didn't matter what your philosophy was. It had to work when it got off the other end of the bench. When you were finished with it, it had to work. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 50 years with these teachings, is, guided by that. It has to work. How do we? Isn't it a nice philosophy to say, love your neighbor? Isn't that nice? But how the hell do you do that if you're filled with rage and pain? Good luck. But then, how do you do that? Oh, you recognize there's a filter in the front. There's a thing called Rakhma. No, you don't want to love your neighbor. That wasn't the instruction. The instruction was keep this filter active, and you get to reclaim your human life. You get to function as conscious, active, present love in the world. And that's what life is. Life is love flowing through a cell. Anything we do, whether it's resentment toward a power person or a neighbor, that restricts the flow of love through our physiology, we're destroying our own human lives. Remember, Yeshua said, he had one purpose. He didn't come to bring dogma or doctrine. He said, I got one purpose. I come to bring you life more abundantly. How do you do that? You forgive everything in you that is unlike love. You face it. You feel it. You stand as a space of love. You breathe. And you remove it from your physiology. And so that's what every tool is about. And one of the most important instructions that came was, one, have Rakhma, and then that second one, the first law had been around for a long time, but nobody understood it, was you bring your human life love present in your physiology, through your physiology, to the greatest offenders in your life, and you get to heal.
So, Michael.
Yes, sir.
A question I have
Uh-huh.
is, what if your dad was still alive and still beating you?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do?
Well,
You just sit there, let him beat you?
First order of business. Yeah, first order of business, if I'm in a state of being physically threatened, then I step out of the physical threat. But that doesn't change the fact. Yeah.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so that's first step.
Yeah. Okay.
That's first step. But now that you're safe, now you've got the work to do of processing through the inherited trauma that came from a power person who probably, had a power person who had a power person who had a power person. And by the way, if you have any children, I guarantee you, you are their power person. I guarantee you, many of those behaviors that you resented him doing, I mean, how many times have we heard somebody say, I'm never going to be like my mother or my father? And that's exactly what they become. Because the energy of high charged pain and emotion rules the game. That's why under stress, we do what our power person did to us and we hated most. Have you ever done what you hated most that your power person did to you to other people? Or to yourself? And I don't really need to ask the question because I already know the answer. We all have.
Yep.
How do you resolve that? You have Rakhma, and then you bring it into behavior by honoring that person. And if he's still alive, you are a step ahead of the game, because he's there to resonate everything in you that you're going to have to break through. My dad's been dead for, almost 50 years now, 45 years. So I haven't had that gift.
I know my mom's, 84. I know it's not going away when she goes. I know that.
You don't have to wait for her to go. Do the work, and it's gone. And as you do that work, there's a great principle in the Course of Miracles says, when you are healed, you are never healed alone. You open the energy window for the person who went before you to also heal. You become the space. You'll hear me oftentimes say to people, okay, holding the space for you. What does holding the space mean? It means that I will hold you in my mind. I will be thinking of you, which means energetically we are now connected. Doesn't matter where you are on the planet or where I am on the planet. There's nothing we know of that can stop the high energy wave of active present love. There's no material substance that can stop it. So I'm here to hold the space, and as I think of you energetically, I extend that energy toward you. If you've done something that, being a very devout, committed, religious member of the One World Universal Original Blame, which I'm blaming you for what moved in me, then by extending love to you, I'll get to heal that in me. But remember that virtually every one of us, by the age of 4, in this culture in particular, we all come in the same. We all come in as conscious, active, present love. And every one of us, that's our starting point. And in this culture in particular, my estimation is by the age of 4 or earlier, virtually every one of us has been converted. We are now devout, practicing, card-carrying members of the One World Universal Religion of Blame. And if you go to church, you're brainwashed into that one from day one. Because remember, the devil made me do it. What is the devil made me do it? A statement of blame. It isn't my fault. I'm just, I'm just Mr. Nice Guy. I'm just being a nice guy, and I only rage at them because of what they did. No, you rage at them because you have rage in you, unresolved. You shot terror at somebody because there's terror in you. And all of those energies need to be resolved in order for us individually and collectively to live as human beings.
I think about that. I have in my office, I have a collage from my kindergarten days till college, and I was so happy up until kindergarten, and then you can just see you can just see in my eyes.
Yeah.
Things from there on out were just serious.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's spooky. I mean, I'm almost thinking about taking it down because it's just like a reminder of what you just said.
Well, here's my input on that one. Rather than taking it down, put it somewhere where you can sit comfortably in a chair in front of it and look at it. Tap into you at the age of 3, 4, and 5, and remember who you are. It was interesting. This past week, we spent a week with our kids and our 2 grandchildren and the other grandparents. We did a grandparents' vacation. We did a week down in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So Ryan and Gabby, the parents of our granddaughter Aria, who we take care of, have been doing for 2 to 3 days a week for the last 6 years. She's now 6. And our new grandson, who's just been circling the earth for 7 weeks. And so we all had a family vacation last week. Got lots of newborn holding time. That was pretty cool. And at one point, the other grandmother had a meltdown. Something was going on between she and her husband. We don't know what it was, but she was in meltdown. And she pointed some of that energy at Aria. And Jeannie was there and saw it and went to comfort Aria and said, there's just something going on with Ladi, that's what they call her, with Ladi, and that's not about you. And Aria looked at Jeannie and said, I know Nini. She calls Jeannie Nini. I know Nini. She's just forgotten who she is. That's what she said about her grandmother in meltdown. Could point it at her. So I support you sitting in front of that whole collage, remembering who you are, and then bringing who you are into your breath and into your physiology, and watch the transformation, the degradation of your energy, and bring correction in your physiology. And that will serve as a stimulus to bring you healing. And one of the things that needs to happen, go ahead.
I'm sorry, without trying to play the blame game, I knew when I was a child it wasn't me. I knew it wasn't me. But it's never helped.
Yeah.
It's never helped. I mean,
what helped?
I survived by knowing it wasn't me.
Right.
I was just a kid. I was just a kid. Well, I knew it wasn't me, but it just hasn't stopped. I'm 65.
Do you have children? Do you have
I
children?
have four. Four, yeah.
How much of that did you pass on to them?
You know, my kids have told me what a wonderful father I have been to them. So I don't know. That's a tough. I'm sure. I mean, that's a big tell me, but who knows? I was a coach for both my sons. My daughter was in gymnastics. I was very involved. I traveled internationally my whole life, and I don't even know. Looking back now, I don't know how I did it, but I was.
Yeah, actually, when I first saw it, when Tim Walz was introduced in the political arena, I thought of you. You resonate him for me, or vice versa. But here's the thing: when the stress is up and the chips are down, that's when that power person dynamic takes over. And all of us have done it, and all of us as children experienced it. And you know, it sounds like you had some conscious awareness where you maybe didn't fall as far off the cliff as Dad did. But the moments where you engaged in those energies where you did, and the reason why, here's my best understanding of the reason why we do the same thing that we hated the most when we're ultra stressed, because in an ultra stress state, there is no reason available. Literally in the ultra stress state, and I'm talking literally, it's called sympathetic dominance, the blood flow to the frontal lobes of the brain is cut off. The ability to reason is not there. And in confusion of that ultra stress state, I don't know what to do, but I have a God here, my parent. As a child, parent is God. I have a God here inside of me in my unconscious. So I'll just look in my unconscious and in this situation, see what they did, and that's what I'll do, because that's how they won over me. So that's how, in this ultra stress state, I get to win. That's a hard one to give up. It's actually an addiction. Our first conversation was around the idea of the quantum still point, and it's something that I've only been doing with people for the last, 8 or 9 months. And I've been writing about it and working to understand the dynamic, the shift. What is it that happens in that quantum still point state? And the best explanation I've been able to come up with yet is, and what I think is the operative principle, still point breathing, which you've done, puts you into process. And process we define as the ability to keep love conscious, active, and present when something less than love comes up. So whatever, and you'll notice I'm always asking people, are you breathing? When there's energy moving that I know somebody's got an issue around, I know they're holding their breath. That's why I ask the question. It's an invitation to breathe, because if you can breathe, the energy can move. Otherwise, it's locked down. So someone who's breathing will process through and release those energetic patterns. Holding the breath locks it into tissue. And so that's still point breathing. The quantum still point is something that, I pulled out from my early medical training 50 years ago that was more intense than was reasonable to do, in an intensive with a group of 50 people. So it's not something that I have done. It's something I only do now on a one-to-one basis. And what happens is when you get put together the breath, there's a training component to it of letting go of physiological resistance. Where is the resistance in the structure? And letting that open so that more and more the body moves into a superconductor state. And then still point comes, which is normal in the still point breathing process and resolves things. But then in the intensity of the process, not only does still point come out of your mind, there's just an instant, a moment where one leaves the mind behind. And that breaks the addiction to the power person dynamic. That's what I think is operating there. And few will move the energy deeply enough through the forgiveness process alone to break that one fully.
Yeah, that's it.
But, you'll hear me oftentimes say on the radio show, you got to be out of your mind. You're going to heal that one, you got to be out of your mind. And it's not an easy thing to let go of carbon-based memory. In fact, what we've been talking about, I don't know how long you've been listening to the show. If you've been listening the last few days, we've been talking about, the last section where Yeshua is talking about John the Baptist, and he says John the Baptist is the highest of those born of women. In other words, John the Baptist is admired by everybody as the pinnacle of intelligence and success out of carbon-based memory. He's the best there is. Boy, everybody wants to be like that. But then he says, so he's talking about those who are functioning out of perception, out of carbon-based memory, the body's mind, Adamos, the red clay. That's the section we're working on in the book of Thomas right now. And then he says, but a newborn is higher than he because the newborn is functioning out of being, out of the kingdom. So he makes John look like a piker. The highest of, what everybody admires, the highest intellect possible is a piker in the presence of one who's functioning through Rakhma as a human being and honors everyone, brings love present through physiology to everyone. And that's the work of Yeshua. And it's a process. It doesn't happen in an instant. You do it layer by layer. But when ultra-stressed, and remembering or knowing that stress is created by goals, one goes in, and that's why we suggest doing the forgiveness process on a daily basis, because it keeps goals at a manageable level where you don't go into that ultra-stress state and play out the power person dynamic on someone. That you keep your stress levels at a reasonable level by canceling goals. And so as you do that, you get more and more, bring the ability to bring active present love into your physiology, which flushes out every trauma energy that never belonged and frees you from the mind of man. You remember they talked about Adam in the scriptures, and what does it say happened? He fell into a deep sleep. You'll notice they never say anything about Adam waking up until you come to the New Testament where Yeshua says, a lot of that stuff from that Old Testament, that's all hogwash, guys. Here's what you have to do. You got to have Rakhma. You got to function as love. And so he brings resolution. And now what is it? Where we've gone through the whole Old Testament, and Adamos, people are asleep in the red clay, in the mind that John the Baptist had, that he said was pretty cool as the world looks at it. And then he says, now awake in Christ. You're now awake in a mind that is literally God's mind. This isn't religious, nothing to do with religion. It's where we live with our kids, people we work with, the people we play with. It's now awake in Christ, awake in the mind, literally in the mind of love, the mind of God, and functioning as a true human being. And that's the whole objective of this work.
Well, I will start my forgiveness with forgiving you for comparing me to Mr. Walt.
Oh, I didn't think that was a bad thing. I haven't interacted a whole lot or watched a whole lot of him, but he seems like a big smile. He's a coach. You mentioned you were a coach, and he seems like he's been there, really creating a lot of support for people. So
he's goopy. I think he's goopy.
Okay, well, everybody's got a reality.
Yeah, goopy. I don't know. Oh dear. Can't I just go to sleep and take a pill and?
Wouldn't it be nice? That's what everybody wants. And sadly, we're at a point where the drug addiction, people wanting to take pills in order not to have to feel and deal, that's killing people left, right, and center.
I'm being facetious.
Yeah, I know. I got you. Well, our time is completed for today, but if appropriate, let's continue the conversation tomorrow and take it to the next level if there's more conversation to be had. And maybe we'll hear from Michelle on it too, but unfortunately our time is complete and the show's about to cut us off. So I'm going to say thank you for the interaction and bringing the question forward, and create the best year of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give yourself and to give the world. Blessings.